Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 19th of August, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me by video link today, we have Thompson and Ben Rubin. Welcome to the programme, both. Now, we're going to get kicked off with barbed wire because, of course, lots of people being sent to prison. And the government has announced the relaunch of Operation Early Dawn. So they said in their press release, in recent weeks, prisons in the north of England have seen hundreds of people enter the prison estate after the government took decisive action to tackle violent thuggery on our streets. This has exacerbated long-standing capacity issues in our prisons, which have been operating at critical levels for the last several years, often with under 1% capacity. To manage these pressures, HM Prison and Probation Service has reactivated an existing contingency mechanism, Operation Early Dawn, providing extra oversight for prisoner transfers between police, courts and custody. This means that offenders will be summoned to a magistrate's court only when it is confirmed that a cell in the prison estate is ready for them. Should they be remanded in custody, they will be held in a police station until they are summoned to court. The activation of Operation Early Dawn helps to manage the prison capacity pressure felt in the short term in a small number of regions. This action has been taken to ensure that we always have enough prison spaces to lock up those who choose to break the law. So that's what the UK government had to say. This is what Lord Thompson had to say. He's the Prisons and Probation Minister. We inherited a justice system in crisis and exposed to shocks. As a result, we've been forced into making difficult but necessary decisions to keep it operating. So what is it that they're doing? Well, Operation Early Dawn is part of a number of changes to make room or make space in the prison estate. According to them, it comes into force in early September. It gives the probation service the time they need to safely release offenders. So part and parcel of this is all about, as they had already announced, getting current offenders out of prison so they can make space for all those nasty right-wingers. And an operational assessment being made each morning and throughout the day in order to make sure who they can move out of police cells into prison cells and vice versa. They say that when it previously operated, Operation Early Dawn has helped to minimise disruption to bail hearings and manage the movement of prisoners across the justice estate. And they're saying that it's going to be mainly in these regions, North, East and Yorkshire, Cumbria and Lancashire, Manchester, Merseyside and Cheshire, East and West Midlands. So first of all, Alex, maybe I could welcome you to the programme and just get your thoughts on this. They're relaunching this, they say, as I mentioned, in order to deal with the whole business of getting people into prison where necessary. But of course, they have to make space first. What are your thoughts on it?
Fundamentally unlawful. Mentioned throughout is made here of the justice system, the justice estate, not the law of the land. And it's signally important that Lord Thompson, quite right that you put the Lord in inverted commas, given the state of the upper chamber these days, that he's talked about magistrates' courts, because these are the unlawful courts with no juries nor indeed professional judges. So you don't get either the benefit of judgment by peers or people learned in the law. These are the presumptions that he's operating under, that people go to magistrates' court. There's also a presumption there, Mike, that people will be found guilty and sent down by the beak, as it used to be called, in the magistrates' courts. Even within the law system of England and Wales, it's notorious that the magistrates will convict with no questions asked. This is redolent of some of the district attorneys in the States, or indeed some of the Far Eastern systems, not just communist China, actually. Japan equally, where the presumption is you've got a 99% conviction rate, and the authorities wouldn't send people off for trial if they didn't know they were guilty. So there's no discount rate being applied there for people being found innocent, much less by a jury of their peers. Now, that list of regions of England that you read out is the northern half of where the population gravity is in England. There's an equal dense population area south of the West Midlands, London and the southeast in particular, but these aren't being mentioned, despite the prevalence of all kinds of criminality and all the favourite buzzwords like Islamism there. No, it's because the north of England had more people, such as the woman in her 50s in Cheshire who's been given a 1.5-year prison sentence, who simply reacted in disgust on social media and even asked just the question, how is this allowed to happen? And that was taken as a criminal or terrorist offence. So that's why the north of England is being targeted.
Right. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But before we move on, let's just remind ourselves what the Tories were doing. Now, of course, we've mentioned many times now that Keir Starmer was standing for change, and so far he's changed nothing. He's simply accelerated, except the pace of the change that was already taking place. Now, this is the criminal justice bill that was put into place by, or at least put into the process by James Cleverly. It didn't get passed, obviously, because they ran out of time before the election. But I just wanted to remind everybody what this says, and we'll be coming back to this a little bit later, because it said that they were going to make sentences longer for the most dangerous criminals, including by making rapists serve every day of their sentence behind bars. On the other hand, they seem to be letting people out in order to make space for other people. But here was the key point: establish powers to transfer prisoners in and out of England and Wales to serve their sentences abroad. And I would not be surprised if we see this narrative coming straight back, because criminal justice is something that the Labour Party is intending to bring back through legislation in the not too distant future. We'll see what that does. But in the meantime, Alex, let's talk about education in schools and anti-extremism.
Yes, we've got the new Education Secretary giving a Sunday interview to the Telegraph here about the war on putrid fake news, as she calls it. And this is mostly of concern because the education establishment, in the form of the ministry, is really running away with its own ideas and saying that it's going to train people down to primary school level in what's wrong, spotting extremist views. So obviously there's all kinds of scope here for partnership with the legacy media. So we go on to see what the detail is in who's going to train the children, young children. We see government sources talking to the Sunday Telegraph here that young people are going to be sucked into dangerous online spaces. Dangerous here being code for we can't call it unlawful. So Bridget Philipson, the Education Secretary of this new administration, is now ordering a turbocharged review of the primary and secondary school curriculum. She's talking about embedding critical thinking skills. If you believe that this government and civil service can teach superior critical thinking than dissident channels or dissident platforms, that's quite laughable. And it's going to be across multiple subjects. So just as you used to get propaganda in mathematics about the community cohesion agenda and such things, you get the same now with the teaching of critical media literacy. Countries like Finland have already gone this way. So for a bit of sop to the Sunday Telegraph, which is allegedly a conservative paper and not in sympathy with this new administration, we see that far left conspiracy theories and religion-based propaganda will be included. I suspect the primary motive there is against the Islamic base. I think, there's straight down the line British Muslims who are very concerned about or disgusted about what's happening in Israel, with the complete separation in the Labour Party between the Corbynistas and the Starmerites. This is, as much as anything, an internal cleanup, I think, of anyone who thinks that it's all right to tell primary school children what is going on in Israel, in Gaza. So this looking out for bias and hyperbole is a main concern here. This could go very dangerous. Perhaps we'll talk in extra time about it. But the education system is really performing the job, straight for the government, as if it were the same thing. And just on the same note, we've got the New York Post, a very widely read American title, one of the top 3 or 4 papers in the US, picking up on Metropolitan Police Commissioner Mark Rowley. So that's the magistrate in charge of policing for London. And I say magistrate advisedly, he's not a police officer at law, who's talking to Sky News, one of Britain's legacy media channels. And it was this angle of Americans that got the New York Post in to prick up its ears. We see that a Sky News reporter asked Sir Mark Rowley, what about people whipping up hatred from abroad? And the reporter did not mention the USA, but Rowley said the likes of Elon Musk, and for this and other reasons, people homed in on America. And Rowley, again, outside any concept of the law, just on a policing and policy level, says you can be guilty of offences of incitement, stirring up racial hatred, numerous terrorist offences regarding the publishing of material. So he's deliberately suggesting here that the United Kingdom could ask the United States to extradite people for breaking the current version of UK statute law, with no reference to probable cause or the minimum threshold for extraditing people. Again, police running away with policy on their own.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Now let's just have a look at what the Home Office was pushing out this morning, if we can get that on screen. And here it is. Prison sentences for rioting up to 10 years, violent disorder up to 5 years, criminal damage up to 10 years, more than 1,000 people now arrested. But this was the other one, inciting racial hatred, which relates to what Alex has just been talking about. Now, over the last number of weeks, there have been headline after headline about the Online Safety Act and whether it's fit for purpose. So this is CNBC. Britain considers tougher internet safety laws after riots. We've the conversation, what is the Online Safety Act and why have riots reopened debates about it? The Guardian, what is the UK Online Safety Act and what powers will it provide? Holyrood magazine, Online Safety Act not fit for purpose, study finds. Byline Times, why the Online Safety Act won't stop type of misinformation that sparked riots. The Financial Times, false information cases in wake of riots test UK online safety law. And Sadiq Khan getting involved here as well, with the Guardian reporting that the Online Safety Act not fit for purpose after far-right riots, says Sadiq Khan. This has been in the media over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And around the same time then, Ofcom published an open letter to online service providers. And I just thought it would be worthwhile having a look at this in some detail. They said in their open letter, in the context of recent acts of violence in the UK, Ofcom has been engaging with various online services to discuss their actions to prevent their platforms being used to stir up hatred, provoke violence and commit other offences under UK law. Under Ofcom's regulations that predate the Online Safety Act, UK-based video sharing platforms must protect their users from videos likely to incite violence or hatred. We therefore expect video sharing platforms to ensure their systems and processes are effective in anticipating and responding to the potential spread of harmful video materials stemming from recent events. Again, harmful, the use of the word harm is not defined terribly well here. Additionally, as you'll be aware, the Online Safety Act sets out new responsibilities for online services around how they assess and mitigate the risks of illegal activity, which can include content involving hatred, disorder, provoking violence, or certain instances of disinformation. When we publish our final codes of practice and guidance later this year, regulated services will have 3 months to assess the risk of illegal content on their platforms and will then be required to take appropriate steps to stop it appearing and act quickly to remove it when they become aware of it. Some of the most widely used online sites and apps will in due course need to go even further by consistently applying their terms of service, which often include banning things like hate speech, inciting violence and harmful disinformation. But as we know from YouTube, these things are not well defined. And when YouTube, as they currently have with our second go at having a YouTube channel, which is currently offline at the moment because, or at least we're not allowed to live stream on it or upload content to it because of so-called medical misinformation, the online platforms' definitions of what these things mean and the government's definitions of what they mean may be different, or maybe they're the same to a certain degree. But certainly the way that the platforms are enforcing this tends to go well beyond what the general public may view as what's reasonable. So we put that back on again. There's one final bit here. A couple of final bits. We expect continued engagement with companies over this period to understand the specific issues they face, and we welcome the proactive approaches that have been deployed by some services in relation to these acts of violence across the UK. In a few months, new safety duties under the Online Safety Act will be in place, but you can act now. There's no need to wait to make your sites and apps safer for users. So what safer for users means, again, is open to interpretation and lots of scope for overreaction, shall we say, if we're being generous, or perhaps the intention, as we would argue or have been arguing for a long time, in fact, is to shut down any dissident voice. The idea of legal but harmful failed at the first hurdle when they were pushing this legislation through. But of course, if you just redefine things as being illegal or almost illegal, then we get to the same place. Now, I just wanted to finish this censorship section by looking at this article from UK Defence Journal, because they're talking about the cost of 77th Brigade having nearly doubled. This was published a couple of days ago. So let's just have a look. This is my graphic, which shows their statistics. So in 2016, the cost of 77th Brigade was £7.5 million. In 2024, it's £14.5 million. You see the main major jump happened in 2020 because 77 Brigade, of course, was deployed domestically in order to monitor and whatever the so-called COVID disinformation and misinformation that was doing the rounds at the time. So if we come back onto the UK Defence Journal article, I just wanted to highlight this paragraph. The Defence Cultural Specialist Unit within the brigade was specifically tasked with monitoring internet content related to COVID-19 vaccines. A government spokesman later clarified that these efforts were focused on public safety and did not target individuals or infringe on free debate. Yeah, right. Okay. So this, let's just look at this organization here. So it's made up of, so this is Defence Cultural Specialist Unit. It's made up of reservists and civilian analysts. It was originally deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. So this was 77 Brigade operating abroad. It was later deployed within the UK, as we've just mentioned. And of course, this is the integrated operating concept in action, because if we take the quote from the doctrine, it says the old distinction between foreign and domestic defence is increasingly irrelevant. And I just thought it was a little ironic that the Ministry of Defence was pushing this out today. The Kremlin doesn't want Russians to see this. Limiting WhatsApp and YouTube, these restrictions increase state control of communications and media. And they're saying that Russian authorities are deliberately slowing traffic on WhatsApp and YouTube. YouTube could be blocked altogether in autumn of 2024. The Kremlin is targeting opponents of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Russian state control of information is increasing. And Alex, very, very briefly, I just thought the hypocrisy of that was just off the charts.
State control of information, such as hijacking defence intelligence, which used to be a decent body in my time, and making it put out one-line little thoughts for the day on why Russia is bad. Yes, quite.
Yes. So, okay, well, let's move on to misogyny and the latest from our illustrious Home Secretary.
Of course, Russia is the bad terrorist country in this regard, we're told. But in Britain, misogyny, as defined by the government of the day or a few backroom advisors, is likely to be equated with almost terrorism, and then in a later correction we hear that it's extremism, not terrorism. So let's bring up The Guardian here, which is likely to be the newspaper of record during this administration because of the alleged alignment between the Labour Party and The Guardian. I'm not saying that it's better or worse than the previous arrangement with the Conservatives and the Times and the Telegraph, but we need to look to The Guardian now for most of the leaks. Despite what I just said about the Sunday Telegraph getting another briefing. So The Guardian here is talking about the Home Secretary, so Britain's Interior Minister, effectively only in charge of England because of devolution in this regard, wanting to stamp out the pushing of harmful and hateful beliefs. We're going to see this throughout the news in various jurisdictions. This is just yet another turn of phrase to mean we don't like it, but it's not unlawful, so we'd better ban it because we think we can. Always coming from the executive, never from the Constitution or even the legislature, let alone the courts. It's coming from the executive and a few advisors. So harmful and hateful beliefs are now going to include what they call extreme misogyny. Now, regardless of who's in office, the idea of domestic extremism as a cousin to terrorism has been around for nearly 20 years now, since my time in British intelligence when I saw it coming in. And if you look at the byline, not the Home Secretary's or Home Office Minister's advisor's own words, but you can see that in the write-up above the image, the Guardian talks about gaps in the system, not shortcomings in the law or what is lawful or constitutional, but gaps in the system to catch people. What's going on here? A rapid review, just like that educational turbocharged review we covered, on how to flesh out a new counter-extremism strategy is the current wording, not counter-terrorism. We'll come to that in a moment. It will assess the ideological spectrum, the idea, again, of lip service, that on the left and on the right there are extremists, and in the middle is where is the place to be, and lip service paid to Islamism and far-right extremism. But here it comes that Yvette Cooper is also going on to talk about not liking women much as being extremism if it's taken far enough. In the first version of the piece, published at the weekend, the headline was "Extreme Misogyny to be treated as terrorism under UK government plans." And the Guardian corrects itself by saying, in fact, such misogyny, not defined, would be treated as extremism, not terrorism. Even the government knows it can't get away with saying that women belong in the home is terrorism at this point, under a planned review of counter-extremism strategy, and they've done some updates. Now, Tim Rusty, or Rusty's views, is not to everyone's taste, but I will bring up a bit of his blog. The link will be in the show notes as well. He takes a particularly hard line on these things, but I think that this is a bit of analysis worth concentrating on. Rusty says that this terrorism analysis, with terrorism in inverted commas because it's pseudo-terrorism, will scrutinize a particular ideological trend that Cooper believes is gaining traction: nationwide misogyny or woman-hating, which is now a personal pursuit mission with the Home Secretary, since one constituent of hers in Pontefract in Yorkshire referred to her as something I can't possibly read out, but it falls far short of unlawfulness. Ergo, says Rusty, never mind terrorism, if you read between the lines, it becomes clear that the Home Secretary is on a personal vendetta-related mission to outlaw and criminalise, all from the executive, not from the courts or the Parliament, any and all instances of self-defined misogyny. And so, Rowley is quoted again at the Metropolitan Police because he's already talked about this at London level with a misogyny squad. And Rusty points out that there's no equivalent for criminalising misandry, which is a far, I would say, bigger problem in a society like ours now, having a go at men for being men. So we talk about Rusty talks about the two-tier system. I won't read the rest out, but you see that Yvette Cooper has form, talking about advocating Brexit being extremist. And you'll recall that if you're a long-term viewer, that we played a clip of Yvette Cooper when she was in opposition, having a go at YouTube for daring to give a platform to people like Red Ice Radio. She took that very personally. I turn YouTube on and it suggests Red Ice to me. I am so shocked. Why are you allowing this? Now, I've just put this actually on the section of our front page called Stories We're Watching. If you scroll down the home page of ukcolumn.org, you'll find that. It's directly relevant. John Waters here, I won't go through it now, it's too detailed, but he brings to mind, he recalls in this article, Stephen Baskerville, an academic who specialised in North American cases. John Waters, of course, is in Ireland, and the two of them have taken the lead when it was very unpopular back in the 2000s in saying, if you are too afraid to say there's man-hatred in the court system and in the culture, then that's the first step already conceded to what we now have, where anything you say against a female politician, which is less than glowing, will be pursued by police and people in various ministries as if it were terrorism. And if they're challenged a bit, they say, well, no, it's not terrorism, it's extremism. Peter Sweden, a well-known case, well-known tweeter, Emanuelson is his real name. He's been right on a lot, I have to say. Again, he's regarded as, sort of soft-core hard right or something like that, one step short of naughty boy. But he's got a good take on this, which is that this will be misused to jail anyone that opposes feminism, one of the core planks of state ideology at the moment and cultural mainstream ideology. He says Britain is going full Soviet. But it's not just misogyny, it's protesting and calling upon people to protest. So there was a British account run by Wayne O'Rourke on X, as we now are supposed to call Twitter, Wayne GB88, and he's just been sentenced to 3 years in prison for memes, as covered by Ian Miles Chong, an expatriate British poster on X. In Chong's well-worded summary, the judge decided that his humorous, snarky posts had stirred up racial hatred. Again, it's incitement, not defined, not the actual breaking of the law. The one post that got him was urging people to protest, as with these 50-year-old women in Cheshire that have been sent down for a year and a half for the same thing. Chong says, apparently, in O'Rourke's case, telling people to protest is illegal in the UK. Here's the key bit. If a judge decides it, not the law, not even Home Office sentencing guidelines, it's a judge now deciding these things. We're back to the years leading up to 1688, really, where judges decide what the law is from the bench. O'Rourke's treatment is very inhumane, says Chong. Now, we provide sources at UK Column, so do go and have a look at the account in question. The link I've included is the one that includes the replies by O'Rourke to other people's tweets to give a very comprehensive view to anyone who wants to look at what he was tweeting in the months and days leading up to his imprisonment. And you see if you can find anything there that is remotely unlawful or unpeaceful. It's just a typical, you get more of them in Scotland and Northern Ireland, of course, the sort of Glasgow Rangers type account where anything which is, which is woke gets lambasted. England has a lot of these accounts too. Perhaps we'll go a bit further north of the border. But this is an indication that a whole new tranche of social media is going to be outlawed across the United Kingdom.
Yes, and we come back to this term legal but harmful, Alex, because that is basically what they're trying to bring back here through the back door without actually including it in the legislation. Okay, we'll talk about that in extra, I have no doubt. But Ben, let me welcome you to the programme. And we're sticking on the issue of extremism, I suppose, but Amnesty International.
Yes, we're all extremists now, I think. Good afternoon, everybody. My connection is not the best today for some reason, so hopefully this comes across to you properly. Last week, we were talking about the anti-fascist protest in Walthamstow, and with specific reference to this gentleman that we can see on screen in front of us there. That is Ricky Jones. He is a now former Labour councillor from Dartford who was arrested last week for inciting or encouraging murder, should I say. That was the charge that he's been picked up on. But we also noticed during the show this woman here on in the centre with an Amnesty International high-vis vest on. And I didn't know who that was at the time. I just pointed out that Amnesty International has actually been set up to protect dissidents. So the optics here are absolutely appalling for an organisation like Amnesty. But actually, after the show, I found out that it is, in fact, a senior member of the Amnesty UK team. It's this woman, Ulrika Schmidt, who is the country coordinator for Amnesty UK. This image here is her talking another Stand Up to Racism event. We talked a lot about Stand Up to Racism. They organised the march last week. She's obviously been working with them for quite some time. This was taken at Downing Street in June last year. So she's clearly not a random activist. She's a senior member of the Amnesty UK team. And she was speaking at that event alongside Ricky Jones. So they obviously know each other. They've worked together at least on 2 occasions that we're aware of. And I think this is just completely unacceptable, right, for an organisation like Amnesty to be stood up in public beside this kind of messaging. I contacted Sasha Deshmukh. I mentioned last week, I used to work with Sasha. He is the chief executive of Amnesty UK. I got in touch with him. I sent a letter, which I published on my Substack, which you're going to have a look at, which basically covers what we talked about on the show last week, essentially saying that if this is true, if this is an Amnesty International, Amnesty UK employee, it's completely unthinkable that members of your organisation or members of its senior team would show support for these kinds of remarks. Right? Yeah, it's absolutely crucial for Amnesty to maintain any level of credibility on the issue of human rights. They have to come out and say something at this point. I mean, it's absolutely incredible that they haven't done so already. I sent it directly to Sasha on LinkedIn as well. You can see here that we are first connections. As I say, we used to work together. And I'd actually suggest getting in touch, very politely and reasonably, get in touch via the Amnesty UK contact page on their website. They have been replying to some people. They haven't replied to me yet, which gives me a sense that actually the message has been received and they're trying to work out what to do with it, because some people in my Telegram have been sending messages in and they were got back to within 24 hours, but the response was lacking, quite frankly. Basically says, we appreciate you writing in to raise our concerns. The activity in the activist in the video, they just call her an activist, not a senior team member, has made it clear to us that they were distracted and they hadn't heard the speaker's comments. We strongly oppose violence and any kind of hateful speech. Right, so they're trying to downplay this, but actually Schmidt, it turns out, was trying to get ahead of the game. And on the 9th, which was the Friday before last week's broadcast that I made, this article had appeared. I wasn't aware of it at the time. And Schmidt has basically come out and said that she has reported a break-in attempt at her home after far-right threats. Right, and this is a really interesting development here. So Schmidt, apparently someone's tried to get into her home, so we're told. And she then goes on to say that they, the far right, are feeling humiliated because they wanted to smash up the immigration office in Walthamstow, and now they are trying to get some satisfaction. We know, apparently, that there were elements among the far right the supposed far right, who are hardcore Nazis, and they are happy to kill, according to this article in The Guardian. Now, she doesn't provide any evidence of that or to the existence even of these people, actually. And the only talk of killing that I've heard over the past few weeks has come from the radical left, including Ricky Jones, who you were talking with, Ms. Schmidt. What this feels like is, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of DARVO, which is deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. Right, so this is a tool of manipulation by narcissists, and we see this absolutely everywhere on the left at the moment. Deny it, attack the person who is accusing you, and actually reverse victim and offender. So Ricky Jones and the people stood there cheering for the encouragement to murder of political dissidents, they're the actual victims, apparently. Amnesty appears to be going along with this. They've started posting again. There was a hiatus for a week on their Twitter page, I guess, while they waited for the storm to calm down. But they've started tweeting again, but about homelessness, very warranted to talk about homelessness, but kind of beside the issue here. They've started talking about human rights issues in Iran, which hilariously contains a trigger warning because it mentions violence, which is ridiculous in the context. And then also, of course, pushing for more mass migration, right? Which ultimately is, at the root of the issues that we're dealing with here, and just a little bit more, if you want to understand a bit more about Amnesty, you should go and check out this article on the column from Patrick Henningsen from 2016, which basically explains that it's a front organization for the US State Department, which would explain quite a lot. And what else have we seen in the aftermath of these events? I think this was one of the most striking articles that I saw, actually, from The Guardian, basically taking the gloves off, I would say. There's absolutely no quarter being surrendered here from The Guardian. We keep hearing about legitimate concerns over immigration. The truth is, there are none, according to Maya Goodfellow, who is, I think, 27, 28-year-old academic who apparently knows everything there is to know about immigration into the UK. Few quotes from here. I'd suggest going to read the article. It is absolutely mind-blowing. It would be a mistake to characterize the far-right riots as a cry of desperation from the poor. Yeah, according to my good fellow. We shouldn't understand this as a cry of desperation from the poor. We have absolutely no empathy for these people. They're just bad, right? That's what we're getting from The Guardian. And then this final statement, the reasons behind the recent violence are many and complex. It cannot be neatly chalked up to the immigration debate alone. That's certainly true. But the anti-immigrant sloganeering needs to stop. Whether it's the appeasing of legitimate concerns, a commitment to stop the boats, or the more acceptable in polite society promises to put controls on immigration, they have all played their part in leading us here. If politicians want to understand the far-right violence, this is one of the places that they must start. So apparently now, just wanting a control on immigration, something which would potentially be discussed in polite society, is makes you an extremist. Yeah, as I said at the start, we're all extremists now. But apparently there are no legitimate concerns. Well, how about this for a legitimate concern? The Rochdale grooming gangs, this headline here, just really mind-blowing. The girl kept in a cage and made to act like a dog, a 15-year-old raped and killed with heroin injection from an abuser, and an aborted fetus kept in a freezer by police, which is indicative of what's been happening across many northern towns for decades in full sight of local police and politicians and left-wing political activists. And what Maya and The Guardian and everyone seems to be ignoring in all of this is that the trigger for the riots that happened last week happened when Elsie Dot Stankham, Alice de Silva Aguiar and B.B. King were killed in the Southport attack just 50 miles down the road from Rochdale.
Indeed. Okay. Well, that's quite a somber note you leave it on there, Ben. We will undoubtedly have plenty to talk about on that and extra as well. Okay, if you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, the place to go is support.ukcolumn.org. We do need your support, and so thank you to everybody that is supporting us. Memberships begin at £5 a month. Please act as the algorithm, because as we've mentioned, we are increasingly censored. ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk is where to go to get the information to share. You can also help us out by buying something at the UK Column shop, and that would be fantastic as well, particularly the Agenda 21 Your Life in Their Hands book, which is available still for sale there. Now, Alex, very, very briefly, interview tomorrow with, well, you'll have to explain it to us.
Kalistrat Marvin Atudore, not exactly a name that trips off the tongue, a softly spoken political scientist from Romania whom I interviewed when I was in Moldova late last year. And he's talking in the first half about his understanding of US hegemony in the world since the Second World War. And in the second half, he becomes much more of a historian and a spiritual analyst. I found it particularly fascinating. He starts with Gladio, many of our viewers will know about that, and just takes it into the realm of mind space and mind wars.
Thank you, Alex. A reminder of our event tickets on sale, 19th of October 2024. UK Column on location in Bristol. Anybody that has bought tickets already, we will be sending you the details of the exact details of the venue very, very shortly in the next day or two. This is all about people doing stuff. So Media on Trial, that team will come together again, hopefully for that. We'll see exactly who is on that group. Hope Sussex will be there. Katie Jo will be there. Bob Moran will be there. And we will have other names in the coming days. So please join us for that if you possibly can. If you haven't got a ticket yet, they're still available on the UK Column shop. Katie Jo's festival, Freedom Music Festival, taking place 23rd to the 26th of August. This is Hope Sussex Freedom Music Festival. Do join that if you possibly can. And also, Brian and I will be speaking at the Heritage Party Conference on Saturday, the 28th of September in Reading. So details on screen, the link to get tickets and so on will be in the show notes. Hopefully you will join us for that. Lots of other speakers at that as well. So where does that take us then? Let's have a look at the latest from David Lammy. So here he is in The Guardian, or the Observer, sorry. It's never too late for peace in the Middle East. We must break the cycle of violence, he said, alongside his French counterpart there. And this is a perilous moment in the Middle East. He said Israel's actions in Gaza continue to lead to intolerable loss of life. Hostages taken by Hamas terrorists remain in chains 316 days since the 7th of October attack. There are French and British citizens amongst them. Fighting between Israel and Lebanon, Lebanese Hezbollah has intensified. Iranian threats of further escalation mean the risks of full-scale and regional war are rising. What we're witnessing is a destructive cycle of violence. So they seem to be calling for peace, but it's through a forked tongue as usual, because they can make all these demands publicly without ever putting any real pressure on the country concerned. And of course, one way that they could put pressure on, which they're not doing, would be through arms sales. So it's perhaps a little disappointing to the British government that a Foreign Office official has resigned over Israeli arms sales. Now, this is the BBC's coverage of it, which appeared today. But unfortunately for the BBC, this story broke 3 days ago. It took them 3 days to get clearance from the Foreign Office to publish about that. Maybe Alex will have something to say about that in a second. And I just wanted to highlight a few of the comments that Mark Smith, the Foreign Office official, made in his resignation letter. So he said, "I write to you on my last day in the FCDO with a message I never wanted to send. It is with sadness that I resign after a long career in the diplomatic service. However, I can no longer carry out my duties in the knowledge that this department may be complicit in war crimes. As a former pen holder on the arms exporting licensing assessment in MENAD, I'm subject matter expert in the domain on arms sales policy. Each day we witness clear and unquestionable examples of war crimes perpetrated by the State of Israel. Ministers claim that the UK has one of the most robust and transparent arms exporting licensing regimes in the world. However, this is the opposite of the truth. As a fully cleared officer, raising serious concerns of illegality in this department, to be disregarded in this way is deeply troubling. It is my duty to raise this," and he's raised it by resigning. And again, in Extra, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I would imagine Alex's view is that that's as he should have done. But the other thing I wanted to mention here was from Welt, and this is the German defense officer, and Colonel Michael Gase, if we really have to demonstrate a credible deterrent on NATO's eastern border, he said in this, or he's quoted in this article as saying, then you can't just play it out in 2 weeks like a maneuver. Then life in Central Europe will change dramatically. That means, for example, transferring 800,000 soldiers, including equipment, through Europe to the east in 2 months, organising transport of the wounded and prisoners of war. Now, of course, this business of transferring soldiers is the so-called military mobility part of European Defence Union, but he's also talking about transporting wounded and prisoners of war. He's talking about a large number of refugees from the Baltic states or Poland on a scale that dwarfs anything we've ever seen before. And he's saying we will then be living in an everyday state of threat. Then it will be a question of supplying the population air protection, medical care in a medical system that also has to look after severely wounded soldiers. This is a vision of the future, which I think is quite a likely scenario. Well, Alex, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that very quickly.
Colonel Gise is performing his duty, as is Mark Smith in the previous half of that segment. Germany has understanding of this. In 1945, there was such a density of refugees, both in housing and thronging the trains as they were retreating from the horrible circumstances in the east, that it was impossible to move anyone, to the extent that the Dutch would have been given permission to grab half of northwestern Germany by the other allies had it not been for this chock-a-block situation of refugee management and the caring for the sick and wounded. So the Germans, as you showed in Colonel Gise's quotation, they're taking an integrated view of what they call Mitteleuropa. Colonel Gise isn't being sinister by using this phrase, although some German planners have been in the past. He's just saying that there is a zone which starts in Germany and ends in about Slovakia, which is an integrated unit geopolitically and when crises hit. So he's quite right to raise this. And just to flag up something of what I'll say in extra time on the Foreign Office resignation by Mark Smith, 21 years ago now, when the second Iraq war broke out, there was not just a well-known whistleblowing by my then GCHQ colleague Catherine Gunn to The Independent, but there was also the resignation of one of the two most senior legal advisors to the Foreign Office at the time. From memory, her name was Elizabeth Wilson. She rightly said she was performing her duty and flagging up the illegality of what was planned by Her Majesty's government. There was no such block by the Foreign Office then on the BBC reporting it at the time. So something has gone on behind the scenes in the last 2 decades to put in a filter there. But staying with Germany briefly then, Der Spiegel, one of the quality legacy titles in Germany, has got hold of this. Yes, it's in German. We get complaints when people put German headlines up, but an English report on this will be included in the show notes. Der Spiegel has picked up over the weekend that the Federal Criminal Police, the Bundeskriminalamt or BKA, is, if a draft bill goes through, which the ministry is just planning at the moment, the German Interior Ministry, it will be given opportunities to perform secret while you were out raids on people's homes, in contrary to any Western practice of recent decades, which is to give people notice and to allow them to film the police and watch while they're searching. And of course, they will also be able, if this goes ahead, to put bugging devices on people's computers and such while they're out. And the Spiegel disingenuously reports that, and they're not even quoting a ministry source, this is their own editorializing here, that there's nothing to worry about because it's not specifically prohibited by the German pseudo-constitution, the basic law or Grundgesetz, to have the resident absent while the house is being searched. Therefore, it says the Bundestag is perfectly at liberty when nudged by the German government to allow a change in the law for the police to do this. It's all being done at federal level because the 16 federal states or Länder would never allow this, and that's where the competence is supposed to lie in Germany's federal system. Another report by another title, RND, in Germany gives more detail, and both of these, as I say, are summarized in an English-speaking piece that I'll put in the show notes.
And I just very briefly want to mention this criminal justice bill once again, because if we remember what the Tory government was attempting to do with this, and I don't imagine that the Labour government is going to do anything different when the equivalent comes in the not too distant future, give the police the powers they need to tackle theft by creating new power to enter a premises without a warrant to search for and seize stolen goods. Alex, it doesn't really matter what the limitation is, whether it's limited to theft or whatever. But as soon as you start allowing the police to enter premises without a warrant, this is a slippery slope.
Of course, because with the best will in the world, you're dealing with people who've got every motivation to plant stuff on people. There's been many examples of this, even in the better run jurisdictions like as England and Wales used to be. And, even the tin pot regimed on the European continent understood in the past that you don't just let police break into people's houses when they're not there, because the overwhelming temptation is going to be to plant stuff, whether it be drugs or extremist material.
Right. And then where does that take us to the EU Commission?
Yes, Thierry Breton, the EU's Commissar for Digital Services, has gone out on a limb and been slapped down by von der Leyen, his boss, interestingly here. So it started last weekend, beginning of last week actually, when on behalf of the Commission, on a Commission-headed note paper, he, no doubt using an underling, but signing off on it himself as France's EU Commissioner, wrote to Elon Musk with regards to X, formerly Twitter, saying that you'll be aware that our Digital Services Act, Thierry Breton's made a big to-do about that, it's his main policy, obviously, we regard you as a VLOP, a very large online platform, so we treat you effectively as though you were covered by EU law, is the substance of it. He says, on the one hand, there's freedom of speech, and on the other hand, we have to balance it with all the other stuff. And there's an implication here that you have to tip off the EU secretly if people in the EU tweet things that we don't like. And so I expect that you will behave as if you were an EU-based platform, because people in the EU can read the stuff, and using campaigning language here rather than legal language, this stuff is being amplified in our jurisdiction. And I note in passing that the EU is a single jurisdiction as far as Thierry Breton is concerned, not 27 jurisdictions, etc., illegal content. So I urge you to promptly ensure the effectiveness of your systems to report measures taken. Well, the first thing Elon Musk did was to make this letter public. And he compared Mr. Breton, who is, of course, a Frenchman, with John Cleese's character of the Norman castle ramparts guy in Monty Python, who leans over the battlements and starts flighting, medieval taunting of the English. And he topped that by quoting a film line, which again I won't quote on lunchtime family news, which invited Mr. Breton to take a step back and literally copulate with his own face, using a different and shorter word for copulate. But it didn't end there. The US Congress decided to take up the cudgel here and wrote back to Monsieur Breton saying, or at least the Committee on the Judiciary did, that you must take no action to interfere in the American democratic process. And they analysed what this letter had constituted as being threats of reprisal towards X-Corp. And in the same time frame, by the way, last week, X has pulled out of Brazil as a basis of operations because Alexandre de Moraes, the Supreme Court head honcho and general dictator of Brazil, as it now turns out, has been making unlawful threats to go after the Twitter people based in Brazil. And it doesn't end there, because Disclosed TV reports that, this is just one of many titles that's reported this, that Brussels, in the form of the Commission corporately, collegially, has said that Mr. Breton was not speaking on behalf of the whole Commission. So an interesting development here, that perhaps they realise they're a bit going a bit too far. And if you just bring that on screen very briefly, you will see in tiny red letters in the box at the bottom, AI summary. I don't want to have a go at other alternative media where we don't have to, but it is a shame that Disclosed TV and many other people in the scene are now openly saying this summary was written by artificial intelligence. Do we not have people to write things?
Well, it's difficult, Alex, but we can talk about that a little bit extra as well. Ben, let's bring you back on, and our old friend Jeff Mulgan.
Sir Jeff Mulgan, CBE. Absolutely, Jeff Mulgan, one of the most influential men in the UK, certainly, probably Europe, maybe even further afield. Let's have a quick refresh on who it is that we're talking about. There he is. He's currently working as the Professor of Collective Intelligence, Public Policy and Social Innovation at University College London, which is the UK's global university. Before that, he was Chief Executive of Nesta, the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts, the Social Innovation Hub, formerly owned by the UK government, which also actually owns the Behavioural Insights Team, the Nudge Unit. Before that, he was at the Young Foundation, more social innovation. In the early 90s, he founded Demos, which we talked about last week as being pretty much the most influential think tank on the current Labour government in the UK. He was also a global leader of Tomorrow, which was the precursor to the Young Global Leader programme at the World Economic Forum. Incredibly well connected, incredibly influential. He was actually cited several times in the Mindspace document, which was where the concept of nudge and behavioural economics was introduced. He was a director of strategy to Tony Blair when that was being created, and way back when he was actually a contributor to Marxism Today. So very much a left-wing radical thinker. Now, last week I talked about Democracy Next and the ambitions that they have to create new global democratic institutions using AI enabled by citizens' assemblies. And I think that the brief came from Mulgan, and this is why, because last year he set up this. It's called the Institutional Architecture Lab, which apparently seeks to improve the global practice and theory of designing institutions better able to address the great challenges of our time. This is all about global governance. They say the world needs better institutions, from climate change to cybersecurity to mental health and well-being. We face challenges with speed, scales and scopes that outpace current efforts to steer towards societal goals. There are lots of options for how to approach this, and we're building a community around how to use them. They do collaborations, work with people on projects, and I'll come on to a couple of examples of people in a moment. Field building, so he's actually positioning this as a completely new academic discipline, which is remarkably arrogant and actually unsurprisingly so from this gentleman. If you listen to him speak, he really does think that he is the bee's knees. And I actually think that if I'm going to mix my analogies up, that the emperor is wearing no clothes. When you actually dig into it, I don't think that he has any actually workable ideas for how to build a civilization, to build a society. And yet he's been asked to set up this institution with the support of the Rockefeller Foundation, who also support Democracy Next. Yeah, so for me, this is the vehicle through which global governance is going to be innovated and distributed. He's right at the center of it. Really fascinating. Let's hear quickly from Mulgan about where he's drawing inspiration from in this drive towards creating new institutions.
And I think, China deserves credit for, certainly for about 10 or 15 years, taking the long-term aspects of climate change and environmental vulnerability incredibly seriously. I've taught for many years at the China Executive Leadership Academy, which trains mayors, governors, ministers in a way we don't do at all in Europe, for what it's worth. And they were willing to look at their vulnerability to shifts in climate and, as you say, to think in terms of huge infrastructural changes, huge shifts in policy to try and avert that. It's become rather less in the last few years as sort of Xi Jinping's rule has squeezed the space perhaps for imagination and debate, but it's still impressive.
So he's very much inspired by China. And as we know, China is a dictatorship, it's a totalitarian system, and that kind of top-down control is what gets Mulgan excited, it's what gets the Rockefeller Foundation excited, and it's why they've established this new institution. And it's all about, I think, rolling out the strategy that the Rockefeller Foundation put out back in 2010, this one, Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development, within which they discuss 4 different potential future scenarios for global governance, including one called Lockstep, which is, I believe, the one that they've actually decided to progress with, which talks about a world of tighter top-down control from these new global institutions, more authoritarian leadership, High Keir Starmer, with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. I think that's probably a very good way of describing the world that sits around us. How is this actually being implemented? It's not just a strategy document that sits somewhere in someone's bottom drawer. It actually does hit reality, it hits the institutions. Mulgan has been working for the past couple of years with the EU on what they call a whole of government approach, right? So this is very much, again, like centralized control of all institutions. It's about delivering the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is all about the SDGs. And you should go and look into that in more detail with this document, Whole of Government Action and Innovation, which was issued last year by Mulgan, which really sets the blueprint for what he's calling whole of government innovation. But within that, the missions that we keep hearing about from Labour and from many other areas of society, including the big consulting firms, they're all talking about missions. It's a national mission. This is where it's coming from. And interestingly, there's a little, in that document, there's a little a diagram that has been produced to talk about the interplay between top-down and bottom-up governance. And actually, when you dig into it, the bureaucratic, centrally controlled institution that you can see at the top there, in the blue circle in the center, the kind of hierarchical system at the top, is completely incompatible with the biological, organic, chaotic entity that is human civilization. These things will not work together, and their attempts to implement it are not going to go well for them or us, frankly.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Now, very briefly, I just wanted to mention this organization, Biometrics and Forensic Ethics Group. Now, we'll do this in a little bit more detail in the not too distant future, but I wanted to mention it today because they've just recruited a new bunch of members. And one of them is Malcolm Oswald, who designs and runs citizens' juries. This is exactly what Ben has just been talking about. And he runs an organization called Citizens' Juries Community Interest Company. And if we just look at what they say about citizens' juries, we'll talk about this in extra. In a citizens' jury, a cross-section of citizens, e.g. in terms of age, gender, ethnicity, education, are recruited and paid to tackle a public policy question like, should we have a sugar tax? You can, anyway, it goes on there a little bit. And then it says the jury meets for several days and is provided with reliable, impartial information from expert witnesses. And of course, that is the crux of the problem, because if you're only providing your expert witnesses, then of course they can only make a decision based on what your expert witnesses say. And if you're restricting the scope of the discussion, then you cannot possibly have a reasonable outcome from any of these citizens' assemblies or citizens' juries, or whatever you want to call them. This is sortition. It is not a good way of doing things. It's something we've been talking about for many years, and Ben's been focusing on in the last year anyway. So we'll talk about a little bit more about that in extra. Alex, let's come back to you finally then, and an update on a story that Charles covered.
Yes, throughout this episode of the news, and in many other episodes of UK Column News, we have seen that there is an attempt outside the channels of the law, and certainly the Constitution, to crack down on dissidents with a CE on the end. And we just seen Ben's reminder that the Rockefeller Foundation, which is one of the leading tax-exempt foundations that have always driven Anglo-American elitist policy since at least 1900, was quite explicit about this. They foresaw that the risk with the chosen strategy of lockstep was growing citizen pushback. So the citizen bit you've just dealt with, of course, we retrain people to be aleatory democracy citizens, randomly chosen to be briefed on the right line to take. But the pushback side, well, we call that harmful, and as we saw in many segments in this news, we call it likely to cause people to have bad thoughts and feelings. So as part of this push, England and Wales brought in the ability of councils, and we saw that it was actually signed off by officials, not elected councillors, to slap orders around abortion clinics that you couldn't have any kinds of protest there, even what was risibly called the protest of praying. And between the council policy officials and the local police forces, it was decided at mid-ranking level that silent prayer was going to be included in this. And as usual, you need somebody to be the victim in the full knowledge that they're going to be unlawfully arrested and prosecuted to challenge this in the adversarial legal system that we still just about have. Otherwise, there is not going to be any moment like this, which is where the Daily Telegraph reports that Isabel Vaughan Spruce, the Roman Catholic campaigner in the Birmingham case, has been given a £13,000 compensation for this silent prayer, which has been found to be not unlawful at all, of course. Being the Telegraph, they talk about Lord Frost, the supposed hero of Brexit, because this is a paper to appeal to the Conservatives with a small c and a big C. But now we see that, don't worry, vaguely conservative section of Britain, ministers are going to review the draft guidance, never mind the change of party in government, since meanwhile that makes no difference, or the councils at local level politically. It's all the permanent state here. So silent prayer within that zone is not actually unlawful, as if we needed a test case to establish that, but we do if the police and the executive branch of government think that they are, taking orders directly from tax-exempt foundations to deal with dissidents without going through courts and parliaments. And so we see that criminalising silent prayer will lead to further cases, says Lord Frost, and it would be much better to stick to the draft guidance by the Home Secretary. So even the august Lord Frost cannot do better than to adumbrate the Home Secretary's draft guidance, which is about 3 steps removed from constitutional law or first principles. So we can see that the commitment that this government has to liberties and fundamental freedoms, as Lord Frost says, is paper thin, but his party was no better when they were in government. Charles Mallet, former policeman, of course, podcasted on the case at the time. He called it the law that has to ask if you're breaking it, as you see in the footage of the arrest at the time. And the solution, as you can see at the bottom of that slide, is the doctrine of the lesser magistrates, which you can find out much more about by searching for the phrase on ukcolumn.org. I have an and finally as well from the realm of health, which is something from 1919, over a century ago. A Cincinnati, Ohio paper carried this poem, which I think we've just about got time to read. This is, of course, relevant with the monkeypox scare at the moment. It's called That Flu Stuff. If you have a tummy ache, it's the flu. If you're wary when you wake, it's the flu. Is your memory off the track? Is your liver out of whack? Are there pimples on your back? It's the flu. Are there spots before your eyes? It's the flu. Are you fatter than some guys? It's the flu. Do your teeth hurt when you bite? Do you ever have a fright? Do you want to sleep at night? It's the flu. Are you thirsty when you eat? It's the flu. Are you shaky on your feet? It's the flu. If you feel a little ill, send right off for Dr. Pill. He will say, despite his skill, it's the flu. He won't wait to diagnose. It's the flu. Hasn't time to change his clothes. It's the flu. For 2 weeks, he's had no rest. Has no time to make a test. So he'll class you with the rest. It's the flu. As true 105 years later as it was then.
Indeed. Okay, thank you very much, Alex. Thank you, Ben. We've got to leave it there for today. Thanks to everybody that's watched. We will be back on the live stream in a few minutes for some extra. If you're a UK Column member, please join us for that. And if you're not, well, consider taking out a membership. It supports us in what we're doing, and you get access to the extra content as well. Thanks for everyone for watching. See you at 1 o'clock tomorrow for Alex's interview, and 1 p.m. on Wednesday for the news again. See you then. Bye-bye.